The sugya we are discussing today is be'etzem the mahus, the essence of mitzvahs, tanis b'yoyim haKippurim. So as we all know, there is no Isser Achila V'Shtia on Yom HaKippurim mentioned in Torah's Moshe, but rather a mitzvah to say, V'anisem es nafshoi seichem, and the Oynish V'kol nefesh asher lo yiseuno v'nichaso hanefesh ahu. So the question is, how do we define the mitzvah fasting Yom Kippur? Because this is unique. It is the only mitzvah of Tanis that's min Torah. All the other Taniyos, and to the best of my memory, to the best of my recollection, we had a shir about Zoymis, I think a year ago before Tisha B'Av, and I discussed 4 different categories of Tanis. So we went through a list of about 25 Taniyos, but the only Tanis that's min Torah is Yom HaKippurim. And therefore, it is extremely important to understand and to define, to have the proper Agdara, what did the Torah asa on Yom Kippur? Is it actually an Isser Achila V'Shtia, or a totally new concept? A mitzvah to say of Inui, and a lav for the opposite of Inui, which Chazal define as Yesu V'Daita, which is the opposite of Inui B'Menias Achila V'Shtia. And today we will go through a list of 5 Gewaldige Chidushim of Achronim, and each of these Chidushim depends on the fundamental question: how do we define the Isser Achila V'Shtia B'Yom HaKippurim? So let me give a short introduction, an introduction that's relevant, B'Kol Gidrei Achila Sheb'Torah. And as we know fundamentally, Din Achila B'Torah we find by mitzvahs lo ta'aseh and by mitzvahs aseh. Quite a few of the mitzvahs Sheb'Torah involve Achila V'Shtia. Some of them mitzvahs aseh, others mitzvahs lo ta'aseh. And these 2 categories, aseh v'lo ta'aseh, kum v'aseh and sheval taiseh, have so much in common. Let's start with Macholas Asuros. It's closer to Yom HaKippurim. So there's a long list of Macholas Asuros Sheb'Torah, which are not associated with Zman, only with a Chefza. Kol Haminim Hatmeim. Bebehemois Asoda, Chayois Hayar, Oif HaShomayim, Digei Hayom, Besheretz HaOretz. And this is a huge category, Haminim Hatmeim. And then we also have many Macholas Asuros, which are not min hachai, but rather min hatzomeach. Orla, kil'ei hakerem. And then we have minam atahorim, dam v'chelev, which are also, even though the meat of those very same animals is mutar. And then we have an Avela B'Tzeifa, which deals with the meat of kosher animals. All these, Asad Shavashavem, common denominator is Chefze di Isura. Then we have a separate category, which is a combination of Chefze and Zman. What do I mean? Chometz bePesach. Other macholos are mutar in Pesach. Chometz is mutar in any other time of the year besides Pesach. So the Issa of Chometz bePesach is a combination of a certain chefza in a certain time. How do we define Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur doesn't depend on a chefza. Yom Kippur is a Issa, Achila V'Shtia, whatever you choose. Everything is also. And therefore, the question arises, Could this be defined as Isser Achila? Or is it to be defined as an Isser Achila, but Edin B'fnei Atzmoi, Geder B'fnei Atzmoi, Mitzvah Say Shel Inui, and the Isser of Yesud V'Daita. Closely related with all the Tzayim that are Derabonan, Tani is Derabonan. So that is the fundamental question we deal with today, and the Nafka Minis La'alav. As I mentioned before, there is so much in common, generally speaking, between Mitzvah Saseh and Mitzvah Lo Ta'aseh, in many Gedorim. So let us just mention a similar analysis of Mitzvahs Sheba Achila. Now, Mitzvahs Achila are far less in numbers than Isurei Achila. Let me make this clear. But we still have the same Haggadoros, the same categories, which means Achilas Kochim, Achilas Truma Lekoyanim, depends only on the Chefza, not on the Zman. There's a mitzvah to say of Achilas Kochim every day of the year. Achatos va'oshom anacholam lekoyanim, kudishim kalam anacholam lebaalim. Well, Zman is a factor. If it's noisar, it's also ba'achila. But it doesn't depend on a certain time of the year. So Achilas Kochim is in a way similar to Mina Matmeinim, Nevela V'Treifa, Dam V'Hachelev. It depends only on the Chefza. And then there's Mitzvah Achila, which is a combination of Chefza and Zman. What would be more natural than to mention Matzah and Pesach? Matzah and Pesach. Certain Chefza, certain Zman. There's a Chilas Matzah and Pesach is a Mitzvah Say, Chometz and Pesach is Elav. And then we have a mitzvah that is only Zman, and it doesn't depend on the Chefza at all. You probably all guess. What do I mean? Associated with Yom Kippur. Mitzvah Achila Erev Yom Kippur. It's a mitzvah to eat. Whatever you eat, whatever you drink, you're Makayim the mitzvah. So the same three categories that we find by Isurei Achila, we also find by Mitzvah Sheba Achila. Keneged Aminim Atmeim, Anavela Vatreifa, Adam Vachelev, Bosa Bacholov, Orla Vikilei Akerem, all these Macholos Asuris that have no connection with Zman, we find Achilas Kochim, Achilas Truma. And then we have some mitzvahs that are a combination of Chefza and Zman. Achilas Pesach, only once a year. Hamatzah v'hamoiror, B'leil Aleph Shel Pesach. Erev Yom Kippur was he similar to the Isser Achila Yom Kippur Atzmo. So we could have a similar question about Mitzvah Achila Yom Kippur. Is it a mitzvah b'achila, or the mitzvah is just the Sviyah, being satisfied? But that's another discussion. I don't know what the plan of the Archikala is. If we'll have a shir on the Mitzvah Achila Yom Kippur, that's a separate discussion. I just like to have clear pictures and Klora Hagdoros, and that's why I discuss both Mitzvah Achila and Isurei Achila. So the fundamental Yesod is the Kashayla we are discussing today. How do we define the Anisem es Nafsho Yiseich? L'cha'era b'ashkafa Rishoina, the Torah doesn't mention Achila, so why would we say it's an Isur Achila? Wouldn't it be pashut to say you need to learn Chumash? And the Chumash doesn't mention like Toichal, like Toichlu, but the Anisem es Nafsho Yiseich. However, the Gemara Numa Pei Aleph Omid Aleph, and if we could have the Gemara, definitely we be helpful. And the Gemara asked this very same question: why doesn't the Torah give alav? Favosh steht nicht alav, Pei Aleph Omid Aleph Mesechet Yuma. And the Gemara says, well, we can't have a lav, because if the Torah would want to give us a lav, we have a problem with the nusach. How would the Torah present, how would the wording of this lav be? If the Torah would say, lo yisoichlo, then we would assume that...
Next Amud.
Yeah, Pei Aleph Amud Beis. If the Torah would say, lo yisoichlu, then we would assume then the shear would be a kazayas. And the shear is not a kazayas. And therefore, we don't have the loshon of Issa Achile Shebetoira. Omer Shlokish, right after the Mishnah, Mipnei ma loy nemra azora be'inui, mishum de lo yefshar, heiche nichtav. Nichtav rachmona lo yoichal achile be'kazayis. Nichtav rachmona lo yisauna kum achoyer mashma. So, the Torah actually explains, and let's have a look at Rashi. Achile be'kazayis mashma, but Torah lo yichiyavo, olav elo be'yishuv hadas. So Rashi seems to explain the Gemara. The reason the Torah writes, is just to teach you that Isra Achila b'Yom Kippurim has a different shear than all the other Isure Achila Shebetoira. Every other Isra Achila Shebetoira, as well as Mitzvahs Achila Shebetoira, Halacha l'Moshe Messina, the shear Kazayis, Yom Kippur is an exception. It has another shear. So the lotion of the Gemara and the lotion of Rashi, Mipnei ma loy nemra azora be'inui mishum de loy efshar. L'chayra Shlokish says the Torah should have written an azora lo yoichel. The reason the Torah doesn't do so, because it has a different shear. So this lotion of the Gemara and Rashi seems to indicate, in essence, the definition is the same definition, and it's Achila. The only reason the Torah can't use the Lashon Lo Yisoichal is because then we would mistakenly assume the shear is Kazayas, which it is not. It has a different shear. Two additional sugyas would prove to me that the Issa Yom Kippur is in essence an Issa Achila. But that's not mefurish, but rather ba'oimek halamnis. Machlokes Reb Yochanan ben Shlokish across the board, all isur ichili shebetoira, chotze shirosa ben Torah or chotze shirosa ben Rabban. And that's the fine gimel in Masechet Yom. Reb Yochanan says chotze shirosa ben Torah, or Shlokish chotze shirosa ben Rabban. So even though this machlokes is relevant by all macholos asurin shebetoira, the Gemara actually presents this machlokes on Yom Kippurim. So there's a Yerushalmi and Tumas that is contrary to the Bavli, goes against the Bavli. The Yerushalmi says, "V'yom Kippur even Shlokish is moedachot shosam and Torah." But in Bavli, in Masechet Yom, it is clear that the machlokes, Reb Yochanan and Shlokish, is by Yom Kippur as well as other macholos asuris. Not only Yom Kippur, can be only Yom Kippur, because Reb Yochanan learns chotze shirosa min Torah from the posuk Kol Chaylev. So the source of this Isser is Isser Chaylev, but it is clear in Bavli that the same machlokes that Reb Yochanan and Shlokish have by Chaylev, by Dam, by Nevelas Atreifis, is relevant also to Achila b'Yom Kippurim. La'aniyas daiti, if Yom Kippur would be a different geder b'Yesodai, then the machlokes Reb Yochanan and Shlokish would not apply to Yom Kippur. It's a different geder. Why would it be the same? Reb Yochanan learns chotze shosam Torah makol chaylev. So yes, there should be no difference between chaylev and dam and avel and treif and all of the kirei hakerem. Tzad shova shebem, they're the same, essentially the same. Macholos asuros. But if Yom Kippur would be a totally different concept, it is about Inui. And Pochas Mekashir, there is no Inui, then logic would dictate, even a Yochanan would agree, Chotz Hashir is not also Menatoy. And that is based on Arichas Gedolah that I wrote in Minchasosha Pashas Vayikra on the sugya of Chotz Hashir also Menatoy. I wrote about this a few different sources in my Sforim, primarily in Parshas Vayikra. And I made it clear, Chotz Hashir also Menatoy is only when it's a question of shiurim that are halacha l'Moshe Messinai. But when the shir affects the essence of the lav, etzem hamahus, Chotz Hashir is not also Menatoy. So the fact that according to the Bavli, Reb Yochanan v'Reish Lakish nechlaku b'Yom Kippurim k'moi shenechlaku b'chelev proves that mitzad etzem ha'hagedorah, the fundamental definition, Yom Kippur is a Isser Achila, just like Shar Isur Achila Shebetoira. The only difference is Koiseres instead of Kezayis. The third sugya brings us to Shavuos Daf Lamed Daled, Psoche Mayan Zayin, Nozi Adov Daled, Ho'oichel Nevele B'Yom HaKippurim, a big machlokes Reb Shimon Chachamim. And that's part of the sugya of Isur Chal al Isur. Ho'oichel Nevele B'Yom HaKippurim. If the Isur of Yom Kippur came before the Isur Nevele in Isur Chal al Isur. This makes sense if we're dealing with macholos asuros. So the first Isur to be Chal al Chefza was Yom Kippur. Number 2 was Nevele, ein Isur Chal al Isur. So in this sugya again, I argue, if Yom Kippur is not macholos asuros, it is a totally different concept. Inui and Yisur v'daita. That's entirely on the Gavra. Has nothing to do with the Chefza. What Shaykh Isur Chal al Isur? These two Isurim are not of the same nature at all. Macholos Asuros are on the Chefza. The Mitzvah Spinui is on the Gavra. Two Isurim of a totally different nature. So these three fundamental sugyas, one is Dikduk Haloshoin of the Gemara and Yume Peyalef, and the other two rayas are Lomdish rayas. Chotz Hashir also Menatoy on one hand, Isur Chal al Isur on the other hand. So my basic feeling is, B'yesoidoi shel davar, B'yesoidoi shel davar, Asor lechol v'lishtois b'Yom HaKippurim. That's the fundamental Haggadah. Asor lechol v'lishtois b'Yom HaKippurim. And the reason the Torah writes Eloshen Inui is only because we need to know that the Shir is a Kezeves, which is the Shir of Yisur v'daita. Now, there might be an additional nafkamina. According to the Shagisaria, Yom Kippur there's an Isser even Shelo Kederach Achila. Because the Gemara, Daf Chov Daled the Masechet Pesachim says, Bosa b'cholav is also Shelo Kederach Achila. And why is that? Because by Bosa b'cholav we do not find Loshen Achila b'Torah. How do we know Bosa b'cholav is also b'Achila? Gimel Pa'amim, 3 times we find in Torah Lo Yisavashal Gudi B'chalei V'imoi. Echod Isar Achila, Echod Isar Nova, Echod Isar Bishul. So the Gemara clearly says because the Yisra Bosa b'cholav is not B'Loshen Achila, it's also even Shelo Kederach Achila. Shagisai argues the same would apply to Yom Kippur. There is no Loshen Achila b'Yom Kippur. Pela Otsu. Shagazari was one of the giants, one of the towering giants, B'Tkufas Achronim. In Sefer Aliyos Eliyahu, it is brought that the Goen said that the Shagazari doesn't need more than 1 hour to fly through the entirety of Shas, from Tchilas Hashatz at Soifer, if he wants to bring a Raya or a Percha to any halach. Pilei Plois. The Rambam clearly says, Perek Hey Yesod HaTorah, that Yom Kippur, there is no Isra, Achille Shelo Kederech Achille. Contrary to the Shagasari doesn't bring that up. But the argument of the Shagasari is the same as the Gemara explains. Why doesn't the Torah say Lo Yisaychlu B'Yom Kippurim? Because the Torah wants to teach us it's not a Shir Kazai, it's different Shir. Shagasari uses that same Yesod to Asar Achille B'Yom Kippurim Shelo K'derech Achille. Many years ago, I think it was about, more than 40 years ago. I have a difficulty remembering dates and years. Human memory is so selective. But many years ago, when my great Rebbe before he had heart surgery, and he was suffering from angina pectoris. And in those days, it's just amazing to realize how much medicine advanced. The doctor said that when he feels that pain in his chest, he needs to take sugar, just eat sugar to ease the symptoms. And Yom Kippur approached, and the Kloiser Rebbe was mesupik. If you'll have those pangs of pain in Yom Kippur, what is preferable? He could take sugar, Erev Baydov or Mar, and put something very bitter onto the sugar. So he wouldn't be nana from the sugar. Erev Baydov or Mar, Rambam Perek Yud Dalad Memacholos Asurais is one of the three versions or possibilities of Shelo K'derech Achille. But according to the Shagasari, it's also for the Shelo K'derech Achille. Or would it be preferable to put the sugar into a capsule? Those plastic capsules that we use for many different medicines. And maybe that would be considered as if Korchoy B'Siv. And Korchoy B'Siv we learn in Psochim Kuf Tesvav. One is not Yoitze, mitzvahs, moror, because it doesn't feel the time. So, because I'm going to be contemplated what would be better. I shared this story many times in the past, but it's not really nugeya to our sugi. So now I would like to discuss 5 chidushim that we find in Achronim that seem to be the tzdadim of our question. Machne Chaim. Shuvas Machne Chaim. The Machne Chaim was one of the youngest Talmidim of the Sam Sofer. His name was Sofer, Reb Chaim Sofer, who was the Av based in a Munkach. He was not related to the Sam Sofer, even though both had the same family name. But he was a Talmud of the Sam Sofer. The Sam Sofer had Talmidim in many different signonis, many different Darkei Talmud. The Machne Chaim is a big Mechadish. Orach Chaim Chelik Gimel Samen Lamed Tes, the Machne Chaim is Mechadish. That if a person eats on Yom Kippur, pochis, and that is what we many times recommend for a chayla. Chayla sheyesh v'sekona. He eats l'shiyurim. But if he ate l'shiyurim again and again and again, and he seems to be totally satisfied, chayiv koros, shocking. But the Machne Chaim argues, at the end of the day, he's not a ma'una. He achieved total yesuva daita. The pasuk says, "Kon nefesh asher lo yiseuna v'nichraso hanefesh hahi." So that's the chiddush of the Machne Chaim. What is even more surprising is that the Machne Chaim's brother, who was an official sofer, Reb Chaim and Reb Fishel were 2 brothers. The Machne Chaim wrote 2 Sforim, Shuvas Machne Chaim and Peles Chaim and Masechet Gittin. Reb Fishel's brother wrote a sefer named 8 Sofer, Klolei Hashatz. So the Machne Chaim is Mechadish this big chiddush, and the official sefer writes, I heard this from our great Rebbe, the Sam Sofer. Oh, So it's not only the Machne Chaim who was known as a big Chachin. The Machne Chaim's brother, who was also going to be a sort of official Sefer, says, I heard this from the Sefer, from our Rebbe. To me...
Let's put up the Machne Chaim, sorry, we have the Machne Chaim.
So to me, this Chiddush seems to be such a great Chiddush. I just can't agree to this Chiddush because it goes against the Minhag Beis Yisrael, every Moira Heroa, and I paskin this 1,000 times. Chodesh Yesh V'Sakona, we paskin Pochas Mekashir as much as he needs. So let's have a look at the Machne Chaim on our screen. Asher hoidatonu arasha chidashti mishoich alchotz shir kol hayon b'yom kippur chayav koros. Du saveh kol kach shebachol mavorach b'chsamazon. And you wrote to me ki hoyisi b'shir etzel mornach sam soifer shemati et zeh mipiv. But I didn't find it in the Svam of the Chsamel Shleifah. Aval boro zeh shemati mipiv. Well, I won't argue with the official Sefer. Obviously, the Chasam Sefer said it. But I do argue he probably just said it as a chiddush and a shir b'derech lamdis, not halacha psuka. If that would be a psak of the Chasam Sefer, we should find it in Shuvas Chasam Sefer. So this chiddush is only misyashav al aleiv if we would assume that mitzvahs Yom Kippurim is not an Isser Achila. It's a new Geder, totally new Musad, a new concept. Inui Yesud V'Dait. But according to my opinion, that I proved from Gimel Rayis, no. Achila. Ve'ein Achila Pochas Mekishir. And the shir is Torch Kedei Achilas Pras, Velo Kedivrei Machne Chaim. However, we do find a similar chiddush in the Chasam Sofer, and maybe even a greater chiddush, and that is in Chiddush Chasam Sofer, Rosh Hashanah Tes Amud Aleph. And this is an amazing Chasam Sofer. Chasam Sofer Rosh Hashanah Tes Amud Aleph. As we all know, ve'enisa mes nafshoy seichem b'yoyim hachi. And the Gemara many times in Shas, the Gemara says, v'chi v'chi misanim, haloi ein misanim elo ba'asiri. Elo, kol ho'oicha v'shoyse b'yoyim hachi, ma'alo narakosav kilos anachi v'asiri. So it's from this posuk that we learn the mitzvah, achila, Be'erev Yom Kippur. This is a mitzvah that we don't find mefurish in Chumash. We learn it from Ve'enisem es nafshe sechem b'yom hachi. Comes along the Chasam Sofer, and the Chasam Sofer says, Ein mikra yoytze midei pshuto. So the Chasam Sofer is machadish, and he uses language. Le'yashev kol hanel nagdim ma shehiru einai min hashamayim b'mokom hanichu li le'esgader bo be'ezas Hashem yisborach. Da'ach inu deknisas Yom Kippurim l'salem shiachtel lifroi shmachi le'v'shtiya shonos yemes koydem halaylo kedei sheyakonas li'yom kishu ma'una v'kishu odam oichal ad halaylo mamish nimtzo nechnas la'yom bekeres maleya v'nefesh sevio aval kishu mafsek sho koydem nechnas Kishu me'una. Wow. So the Chasam Sofer says, so if you eat till the last moment before the Shkia, what, you chayav koros? You're over on kol nefesh asher lo yiseuna? Well, there's a machlokes regarding Tosefes. The Tosefes in Kippur is rega kememre. Doesn't really make it any difference regarding Inui. And the Chasam Sofer seems to be very proud of this chiddush. And once again, if this would be a psak halacha, it should be in Chuvas Chasam Sofer, not in Chiddush Chasam Sofer. And this is a chiddush we find nowhere. If this would be a halacha, It should be in Mishnah and in Gemara, in Bavli Yerushalmi, the Ramban and the Rambam, the Beis Yosef, the Tur. This can't be a halacha. It's not even found in Chuvas Chasam Sofer. Chidushim are chidushim. Sometimes Rosh Hashivas and Shiur say amazing chidushim. But once again, the Chasam Sofer doesn't make sense if the definition of Yom Kippur is an Isser Achila. Also, lechol v'lishtois b'yom HaKippurim. The Chasam Sofer only makes sense, once again, if we define the mitzvah of Yom Kippurim not as an Isser Achila, but rather mitzvahs inui and an Isser of Yesud V'daita. So even if the cause of Yesud V'daita was Erev Yom Kippur, still is an Isser. Similar chiddush to the Chasam Sofer we find in a sefer that is not well known, even though the Machaber was one of the greatest gedolim of his time. And he was Ben Giloi, Ben Dori of the Chasam Sofer, slightly older than the Chasam Sofer. Reb Wolf Boskovich, Sefer Seder Mishnah al Rambam, Hilchos Shvisas Osor, Perek Aleph, says a similar chiddush as the Chasam Sofer. Once again, this proves that the Chasam Sofer's approach, not halacha l'maaseh, but rather in the Chidushim, was to define Yom Kippur geder b'fnei atzmo. Source number 3 is a Ksav Sofer, Siman Lamed Aleph Chuvas Ksav Sofer, similar Binyan Shloima, Siman Mem Aleph. Who was the Binyan Shloima? Reb Shlomo Kohen Vilna, slightly younger than the Ksav Sofer. Reb Shlomo and Reb Tzalel were 2 brothers, and they were based in Vilna. Since the Vilna Gaon, Vilna never elected one Rav. Probably Mishum Kvoidoi Shel HaGaon. Nobody felt he could be the Rav in Vilna. After Vilna had this phenomenal Godel HaDoros, the Vilna Gaon. So Reb Tzalel and Reb Shlomo were always both at Beis Hadin beVilna. So Reb Shlomo Kohen, in his Sefer Binyan Shlomo Siman Mem Aleph, says a similar chiddush to the Ksav Sofer. What do they say? If a person ate chotzi koiseves erev Yom Kippurim, toich kedei achilas pras la'achat seisek echovim was the mashlim a chotzi koiseves. Now, it depends. What is the shir achilas pras? The Chasam Sofer says 9 minutes. The Tanya, Shulchan HaRav says 4 minutes. Big machlokes and achronim. But those are details, halacha l'maaseh, which aren't relevant to today's shir. The ikar is the chiddush. So the Ksav Sofer from Binyan Shlomo said, if you ate a chotzi shir, chotzi keseves lefnei tzesek lechavim, toich kedei achilas pas, you were mashlim, the other chotzi keseves, after tzesek lechavim chayav koros. Would they say the same regarding Chometz and Pesach? Chotzi kazayas lefnei tzesek lechavim, chotzi zayas la'achat tzesek lechavim chayav koros? Of course not. Impossible. He didn't eat a kazayas Chometz v'Pesach. What he ate before tzesek lechavim is not Pesach. So once again, I don't want to go into details after the shki. It's a suffix. But if it's suffix, it's only a suffix. We're talking about the principle. Milta de pshita, that a person isn't chayav on mecholas asuris only if he ate the entire shir be'isur. If he ate a chotzi shir beheter and a chotzi shir be'isur, it's only a chotzi shir. So it wouldn't even occur to the Ksav Sofer, the Binyan Shlomo, to say this chiddush regarding Chometz v'Pesach. They don't. Only regarding Yom Kippur. So this chiddush, once again, has no room at all unless our understanding is there is no Isar Achile b'Yom Kippurim. There's a mitzvah of inui and an Isra b'Yesud V'daita. It's still a gewaldige chiddush. It's still a gewaldige chiddush. it's still a gewaldige chiddush. Because we would argue, even if it is an Issa of Yesud, but the entire Shia of Yesud needs to be be'isor. But at least there's room for this chiddush. Hashlomes Yesud, that's the Issa Koros. So one would comment, how about Heter Mitzvah Frisum? Heter Mitzvah Frisum is only if you eat the Heser and the Itzer together. Not if you eat Heter and then you eat Isser. So that is Chiddush number 3. Now Chiddush number 4, which is very problematic. And I want to share with you a discovery, which is a shocking discovery. But to me, it is very clear about the derech of the Mishnah Berurah. Siman Tov Reish Yud Ches is Hilchos Yom HaKippurim. Isser Achila b'Yom HaKippurim, Din Choyle b'Yom HaKippurim. And the Biur Halacha quotes a Binyan Tzion. Who was the Binyan Tzion? Rabbi Yankov Ettlinger, the Oruch Lener. He is primarily known for his gewaldige sefer, the Oruch Lener. Oruch Lener is a choshev sefer. It's on Yevomes Krisis Nida. In his introduction, I think, to the Oruch Lener and Yevomes, he writes that I wrote Sforim on those Masechtas that the Pnei Yeshua didn't write. So he came to supplement the Pnei Yeshua. Oh, that's a very tough undertaking. Pnei Yeshua was a giant, Anaka Anokim. Nobody could compare to the Pnei Yeshua. But the Oruch Lener did his best. And he wrote an amazing sefer, not comparable to the Pnei Yeshua, but a gewaldige sefer. Anyway, his shuvas are called Binyan Tzion. Let's have a look at the Biur Halacha. If I could have the Biur Halacha on the screen, I just saw it a moment ago. So the Biur Halacha quotes the Binyan Tzion, and he writes, that needed to eat on Yom Kippur, and he ate Pochas Mekashir, or a Shia, as much as was necessary to Fakir Nafsho. And he needs to eat more. But now, he could get away with Pochas Mekashir, and he eats a Shia, Chayev Koros. Ein Shuvas Binyan Tzion, Siman Amidalad. The Bakol Achila Vachila Afam Huto Lo Yelechol Pamachas Yosef Meshia, Makol Mokom Al Achila Shnia, Emo Yodai Lo Pochas Mekashir, Po Yochel Kashir, Chayev Koros. Wow. Chayev Koros? Is this possible? Chotzeshiyah needed to eat lefakech nafsho. So the first chotzeshiyah that he ate was beheter. Not only beheter, bechiyuv. He only ate a chotzi keseves be'isa. How could he be chayev koros? How could he be chayev koros? Al achile shniya. Emo yodai lo bepochas Mashiach. Is that possible? So I want you to compare the Binyan Tzion to the Ksav Sofer. Is it the same? No, I don't think so. I think the Binyan Tzion quoted by the Mishnah Berurah is 1,000 times a bigger chiddush than the Ksav Sofer. The Ksav Sofer speaks about a situation in which Chotz Yeshiri ate before Pesach, before Yom Kippur. He's mashli Yom Kippur. Hashlomes Ashir was be'isor. But in the case of the Binyan Tzion, the first Chotz Ashir was bechiyuv. B'mitzvah, chiyuv, lefakech nafshay. So how could achilas mitzvah, achilas chiyuv be mitztaref? Mechiyev koros. I said a moment ago, the Ksav Sofer is also a gewaldige chiddush. And one could argue to the contrary. Maybe the Ksav Sofer is a bigger chiddush than the Binyan Tzion. Because in the case of the Ksav Sofer, the first Chotz Ashir wasn't Yom Kippur at all. It's before Yom Kippur. In the case of the Binyan Tzion, it's as Yom Kippur. The problem is the Binyan Tzion does not say what the Mishnah Berurah quotes in his name. Doesn't even talk about it. The Binyan Tzion has a totally different question. The question the Binyan Tzion deals with is, Choyle sheyesh b'sakana that needs to eat in Yom Kippur. and he ate a krisedes, does he still have a chiyuv to fast? Or maybe min Torah, he's not fasting. He ate. So he no longer has a chiyuv to fast. That is the question the Binyan Sian deals with. So the question the Binyan Sian deals with is, let's have a look in this question. Al pi haroifim tzorach lechol v'lishtis b'yom Kippurim. Yoiser mikashir. Im tzorach l'shara b'kol achila v'shtiyam yesh sakona, kishalo yochel v'shta oy noimar. The mitzvah stanos nafshasechem me'erev aderev. V'kivin shalo yochel hakayim mitzvah mepnei askol neshov ein k'peidem yochel v'yishta b'oisa yoim gam b'lo yisakon. That's his question. Didn't occur to him that if a person needs to eat pikuach nefesh poches mikashir and he eats a shir, it's chayav koros. That's not the question he deals with. Let's go back to the bi'alocha, and I'll share with you a shocking revelation of discovery. The last two words in parentheses, pischei tshuva. I realized the Mishnah Brura had a very small library. When he decided to write the Mishnah Brura, I think he went to his farm store and he purchased, or maybe he borrowed, Sifrei Yesod al Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Tosefes Shabbos, Marma Mordechai, Shulchan Aruch HaRav, Mogen Geborim. Those are the classics that he quotes all the time in Shalat Tzimur. Wherever the Mishnah Brura called Shalas Chuvas, he didn't have this form. He relied on two sources, Pischei Tshuva. Nobody knows the Pischei Tshuva and Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. Everybody is familiar with Pischei Tshuva and Shulchan Aruch Yoredei. Who was Pischei Tshuva that the Mishnah Brura quotes? He was a Moed Tzedek in Vilna, 50 years older than the Mishnah Brura. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin. Very small sefer. I have it, paperback. And the Pischei Tshuva on Orach Chaim follows in the footsteps of the famous Pischei Tshuva Yoredei, and he's Malakit Tshuvas. In other places, the Mishnah Brura quotes Tshuvas from it, and he writes Pei Ayin. You know, the Mishnah Brura we have on the screen is a new edition. They opened up the Rosh Hashanah. If you look in the old Mishnah Brura, it's Pei Tov. So whenever he quotes Tshuvas, it's either Pei Tov or Pei Ayin. Pei Ayin is Pischei Oilom. Pei Tov is Pischei Tshuva. So the Mishnah Brura didn't have the Binyan Sian. He didn't have the Shoel HaMeishiv. He didn't have Tshuvas Mom at all. He relied on these two Sforim. And these two Sforim are not a daikonim. And this entire keta in Bi'alocha is a quote from the Pischei Tshuva. So it's not the Mishnah Brura's mistake. It's the Pischei Tshuva's mistake. Both the Pischei Tshuva and the Pischei Olam were not daikonim. And they were machshel the Mishnah Brura. Because the Mishnah Brura quotes the exact lashon of the Pischei Tshuva. And the Pischei Tshuva was not a daika. And he puts into the mouth of the Binyan Sian what the Binyan Sian did not say. And the Mishnah Brura just quoted the Pischei Tshuva. So this is a chiddush that the Binyan Sian never thought about. The Binyan Sian deals with a different shaila. A person that needed to eat Yom Kippur kedei lefakeach nafshoy, if he still has a chiyuv d'oraisa of tzoyin, that's what the Binyan Sian deals with.
Can we put it up? Can we put up the Binyan Sian?
In the tshuva of the Binyan Sian, he does not deal with a situation in which he needs to eat poches mikashir lefakeach nafshoy, and he eats a shir. Let's have a look at the end of the Binyan Sian, where he comes to the punchline, to the conclusion. So he writes, Afar Pisha Ochel Shachres, Makol Mokum Yeshchiv Koras Vachatas Lamisha Ochel Shenes V'Yom HaKippurim. He means to say Ochel Shenes Kaseves without any pikuach nefesh. Uba Shalom Mitzvah Sichoila. Kal Zeh Tzorach Lochel Shedavayim. V'Lachen Tzorach L'Shah B'Achilas Choila V'Yom HaKippurim Sheloi L'Achila Ben Kashi Sholem Sheyesh Boi Yiseh Koras Ben Pochas Mekashia Shel Kol Posam Osam Anatoiro. Rak Mashem Maspek. So it doesn't deal at all with a scenario in which he needs to eat Pochas Mekashia and he eats a shear. However, that is the way the Pesach Tshuva quotes him, and the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Pesach Tshuva. So the Chiddush that we find in Bialocha in the name of the Binyan Siyan is similar to the Ksav Sofer. But the Ksav Sofer deals with Nifnei Yom Kippur and he's Maslim La'achi Yom Kippur. The Bialocha deals with first Chotzi Kaseres is Pikuach Nefesh and the second is not Pikuach Nefesh. Chiddush number 5. Coming back to the Chassam Sofer. And this time, not the Chassam Sofer quoted by one of his Talmidim, and not the Chassam Sofer in Chidushim, Shuvas Chassam Sofer. Kuf Chav Zayin. The same in Minchas Chinuch Shin Yud Gimel. So the Chassam Sofer and the Minchas Chinuch both are Mechadish. Chulin Kuf Gimel, there's a Machloikes Reb Yochanan and Resh Lakish. Anoas Groina Yosra Torah or Anoas Mayov. How do we define Macholas Asuris? Anoas Groinoi or Anoas Mayov? And the Gemara gives a few nafkaminas. One of them is, how do we define Shir Kazayas? Is it a Kazayas that'll get into your belly or a Kazayas you put into your mouth? Because B'derech HaTeva, when people eat, some of the food stays between their teeth, b'chalal hapeh, in your cheeks. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, Anoas Groinoi, you're not chayav lav or koros or malchus, only if you put slightly more than a kazayas into your mouth. And we could assume that a kazayas came into your belly. That's the opinion of Rish Lakish, Anoas Mayav. According to Rabbi Yochanan, an exact kazayas into your mouth. The Some Sofer argues, because Yom Kippur it is about inui, Rabbi Yochanan agrees to the Shlokish. It depends on your belly, not on about your mouth, not your base of belief. But what comes in, so that in Gemara Chulin Kuf Gimel, it's Machloikes Rabbi Yochanan and Shlokish regarding gave him an achai, and other Macholas Asuras. Is Yom Kippur the same? Some Sefer says no. Yom Kippur is an exception because it's about Inu. But I think that some Sefer could fit in with the Shagasarya and the Gemara regarding Shir Koseves. Unlike the first 4 Chidushim that we discussed, I think that some Sefer is reasonable, even according to my understanding. It's an Esser Achila, but still it has different dinim. Because it's an Isser Achila that depends on Svia, Yisuvadite. Amar Reb Shimon Melokish Kazayas Shamru Chutz Mishal Bein HaShinayim V'Reb Yochanan Omer in Bein HaShinayim. And why is that? Mar Sovar Araynene Groine Bekazayas Mar Sovar Achila B'Ma'ayov Be'inan. And the Gemara gives a few nafkaminas. Person ate a chotzishir, he vomited, threw it up, then ate another chotzishir. He had a Noah's groinoi, but not a Noah's mayav. So the Chassam Sofer says, by Yom Kippur, everybody agrees, and Noah's ma'ayim is the determining fact, because it's about inu. So as I said, I think the Chassam Sofer is agreeable, even according to my mahalach, my understanding. It's an Isser Achila, but after all, the Torah doesn't say Lo Yisaychu. So just like it has a different shear, because it's about inui, it also can have different halachos. Shelo kederech achila is the shagasarya, and noes ma'ayav the Chassam Sofer. So today, the shir focused on how do we understand the Hagdara of Yisra Achila b'Yom Kippur. And we discussed 5 chidushim of Achronim that L'chayra would be dependent on the 2 Hagdaras. And at the beginning of the shir, I made my own personal opinion clear. My Netiyas Alev is Yisra Achila, Yisra Shti. And I proved that from the Sugya V'Eines Echaralisa, Chochiros Torah, and Loshen HaGemora and Rashi, Yuma Pei Aleph Amid Aleph. It was a pleasure to be with you, like always. Sheniske Tomid Lahagdil Torah L'Adia, and Yishur Olav Eksiva V'Chasim Etayva.